I was like, I got my wife eating cheese on the bed. My dog just threw up on me. I'm like, this is hard.
Yeah.
All right, what is up, Winning Wealthers? It's your boy G Money and B Rock. We're back, and today we have an awesome guest, Michael Albaum with MyFi Academy and the Remote Investor Podcast Show. I was just on the show, had a great time with him and the boys, and today we're going to be learning more about your sort of nomad lifestyle, along with how you've been able to build wealth within real estate. So, if you don't mind, Michael, can you just give us the 30-second background of kind of how you got started in real estate and where you are today?
Yeah, totally. Well, thanks first off for having me on, guys. I'm super excited to be here. So quick 30 seconds on me. I'm a California native, born and bred, went to school, got good grades, went out of school and got a good job. I did all the things that everyone tells you you're supposed to do. And like, this is such a common tale. I realized my job wasn't going to get me where I wanted to go fast enough. So I read this little purple book. Some people refer to it as their Bible, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And real estate just clicked for me because I'm an engineer. So the numbers made sense. And I was like, I could do this. Some other things in the book, I'm like, yeah, it didn't click as much. Real estate just clicked. So like, I could do this. So I went out and bought my first rental when I was like 23. And it just made sense. And I was like, I am totally hooked and addicted. And what I realized pretty quickly is that doing it outside of California could get me a lot further, a lot faster. And so that's when I started jumping into doing this remotely. Because then the whole country was kind of available to me. And I've been doing that for over a decade now and haven't looked back since.
Man, that is awesome. So one thing I like to do is always kind of go back to the first deal. So you said you were 23, and how did you read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which I think is the indoctrination of everybody that starts to get into real estate. I've heard it time and time again. And I read not all of his books now, but at least the first three that are in that series. But so you were 23. That's a young age to do a deal. I think I was 24 when I did my first deal, and it was kind of in my backyard, which made it a little bit easier. But you went and said, hey, I'm going to buy a house somewhere. Like, how did you like learn enough, study enough to figure out real estate, and then pick a market, identify an asset class, and actually have the balls to pull the trigger? I think a lot of people struggle with having the nuts to do the deal, the first deal particularly.
Yeah. So for me, like, I spent 2 years getting self-educated after reading that book, and I didn't know about Bigger Pockets at the time, or it just was still kind of in its infancy, and I wasn't really a podcast guy. And so I was just literally reading and consuming as much information as I could from as many different sources as I could, piecing it together for myself and going, okay, well, this makes sense. And then my dad was involved in like a couple real estate deals in Southern California. And so he had a property manager who was also an agent down there in a particular market that we used to go vacation to. My grandpa had like a mobile home down there that we'd go to on weekends. And so I reached out to her and I was like, hey, can you help me do this? She goes, yeah, totally. And so I had a little bit of infrastructure there, and then kind of that knowledge that I had spent getting myself. And then honestly, like, balls, like, I think it was just, I was too stupid. Like, I was too green. I was too naive. I didn't know about all the things that could go wrong at the time, because all the information I'd consumed was why you should do this and how things go well and how to do real estate investing well. So I was like, great, this is going to be a cakewalk. I just spend the money, buy the house, and then I make money. Great. Seems like a no-brainer. And it wasn't until after I got into that first deal that I was like, oh, this is all the stuff that people don't talk about that started going sideways. So totally ignorant when I went and did that first deal, and still to this day have still quite a lot left to learn.
What's like some of the high level numbers on that deal, right? So it's just to give people a perspective. Is it single family home, duplex? Like, what was the purchase price? How much cash did you put down?
Yeah. So single family home, it was $295 because it was like 2013, 2014 era. So it was foreclosed on, so bank owned. So that whole process was kind of interesting too, just buying a bank-owned foreclosure as my first deal. There was no listing agent that I could go talk to and find out about it. So I bought it for $295. It rented for $1,810, and I put 20% down, and I used an interest-only mortgage because at the time, based on all the numbers, it wouldn't cash flow. And I was like, well, this whole point of doing this is to invest for cash flow. And so using an interest-only mortgage, I was able to cash flow a couple $100 a month. And I bought something that was super turnkey because I couldn't fathom putting additional money into a deal above and beyond the down payment and all the closing costs. So I was like, wait a minute, this has got to be it. Like, this is all the money I'm going to put into this deal ever, and then it's going to pay me a bunch of money. And we all know that's not how that works. But so my very first deal was super turnkey. Property manager got a tenant in there after a couple months that I was sweating bullets. And by the end of the interest only period, which was 5 years, I think the rent was like $2,500 a month. And so that was always the calculus I did, is I knew that rent would increase over time. And so I was betting that by the time my interest only term ran out, the rental amount would be enough to cover the full principal and interest mortgage payment. And that turned out to be a correct assumption.
Got it. Okay. What about, so and today I think you have 60 something units, I think I saw. What was the story from closing that first deal and to where you are today?
Oh man,
that's a lot to
right,
unpack. Let's maybe take it like year by year. So you bought one deal, and then typically, like for me, when I was starting out, I was thinking I'm going to buy one deal a year, and then I started to see the magic, and I'm like, oh wait a minute, I can do more. I can do more of this, and more headaches are going to come along with that. But at the same time, there's, it's worth it. It can be worth it. So like, how did you, not to boil the ocean down in one. One from 1 to 60. Like, what were the next few deals like, and how did that go?
So the second deal I did, because I had the exact same thought, Jeff, was like, okay, if I do one of these a year, in 10 years I'll have 10 properties, and then like I'll be done. And of course, I think that's how so many of us get started, and then realize like, oh, A, I can do more, and B, maybe that's not going to get me where I want to go. So why stop at 10? And 10 was just kind of this arbitrary number that sounded good. So the second deal I did was very similar in the same market, but it was brand new construction and it was a condo. And so same thing. It was a very similar price point. I think it was like $305,000, $310,000. Rented. The rent was strong enough to support a full mortgage payment, and again, 20% down. And so a big part of this was I was just living well below my means and saving as much money as I could. I was newly out of college, making a really healthy salary as an engineer, and then living with roommates. And so my cost of living was close to nothing, coupled with the job that I had. And this is kind of what I talk about, cheat codes, is like, I wasn't making the strongest salary that I could, but so many of my life's expenses were paid for by my company, like my car, my cell phone, my internet. I was traveling all the time, so I wasn't spending money living at home. And so I was single at the time, and so I was just able to throw a ton of money into savings. So that was my second deal, and I was like, okay, great, I'll do one of these a year. Again, getting back to that 10 number. But because I was traveling so much for work, now I had 2 deals under my belt. I'm like, I'm a real estate investor now. So any market that I happen to be traveling to for work, I would just hop on Zillow or Realtor.com, whatever, and look at the local market. And what I happened to find was that you could buy stuff out of California for like a third of the price for what it cost, but it would still rent for 60 or 70% of what the California rents were. And so I saw this massive like bifurcation of, well, I can buy stuff for way cheaper, but it doesn't scale downward like linearly. It's a stair step. And so it just made total sense. I was like, oh, why don't I just start buying stuff out of California? My money will go way further. I'll be able to generate more cash flow. And then I was off to the races. And so that's what I started doing. Like whenever I was traveling for work, I would investigate these markets. I would set up meetings with property managers and local real estate agents because I was able to schedule my own work. And so I scheduled all my work for like Monday through Wednesday. And then I happened to be in most of these places for a couple weeks at a time. So Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I was doing real estate stuff. And so I didn't care where the deal was. As long as it made sense from a numbers perspective, I was sold. And so I bought deals in like the middle of Missouri with this little podunk town, but it happened to be next to a military base. I bought a deal in Ketchikan, Alaska, which most people have probably never heard of before because the numbers made sense. And so I was like, yes, this is awesome. I'm real estate investing. I'm in markets A through E, and I'm so well diversified. If anything happens, I've got these, I'm spread out. And it's just, I hit this wall, man. Like I hit this wall where I was calling 6 different property managers to chase down 6 different properties, dealing with stuff, getting things fumbled in my head. And a buddy of mine's like, Michael, go focus on 1 or 2 markets. Hit those as hard as you can. Watch what happens. It'll blow your mind. And I was like, okay, that's kind of different than what I think so many of us think we should be doing when it comes to investing. And we think we're supposed to diversify. And that's kind of what Rich Dad Poor Dad talks about. He's like, that's what the poor mentality do. He says, go specialize in something, watch what happens. And so that's what I really started to do. I focused on a particular market and just hit it as hard as I could. And that's how I was able to scale really quickly. But Jeff, you were going to say something.
Well, no, a couple things there too. I think what you look to do once you were diversifying is trying to figure out how to streamline operations, right? If you have so many different property managers across all these different time zones, and it's just going to be too hard to. Then you're creating more and more hassles. I always talk about like editing your life and like, okay, here now I got to this point, I've got all this cash flow and these properties, and it's great, but now I've got, I don't have to be the one going to each property to like collect the rent and deal with everything, right? And I'm in the same market, but I have so many different property managers that I'm dealing with, and there's headaches from that. So it's how do you streamline that? And the other thing I wanted to mention, the cheat code part for anybody that is looking to get started. So the people that listen to this show, sometimes a lot of them are just trying to figure out how to get started. Similar to someone, I always tell people, look at something like Bigger Pockets. Look at something, we'll get into MyFi Academy as well, but something like that, you got to learn and get educated. But the biggest thing that stuck out to me that you said, and I think is a huge cheat code, is if you can get to the point where you have a great W-2 job and then live below your means, like live way below your means, it allows you to really, pour gasoline on your investment fire, right? In a good way, not a bad way, but it allows you to, add some rocket fuel to that, because you don't have a huge cost of living, and that's a cheat code that typically, as people make more money from their W-2 job or whatever, they'll expand and enhance their lifestyle, and then they don't have as much funds to invest and really scale a real estate business that could help them leave their job if they wanted to. So
how many markets are you in now then? So you said you consolidated from that point, but how many different markets, cities / states are you in now?
Shoot. I feel like a real schmuck for not knowing the answer to that. I think like 5, 6.
Okay.
Like there's 2 markets that I'm in that happen to be across the river from each other. So that's Covington, Kentucky, and Cincinnati, Ohio.
Okay.
So technically, by geography standards, it's 2 markets, but realistically, it's 1. And then probably I think 4 others. I kind of broke my own rule, but I invested in Portugal, the country. But we can get into that later. If you guys want to. But yeah, I like 5 different markets.
Would love to talk through that. What were you gonna say?
Yeah, let's go to that next. But so like, you have just to get an idea of kind of your layout then. So you have like a property management team, third-party property management, I'm assuming, in each different market, and then they're just okay.
Exactly. Yeah, because I was so busy with my W-2. Well, yeah, I say so busy, but I just got done saying that I scheduled my own work, so I was really only working Monday through Wednesday. I have a different W-2 now, and so that's really the focus. And so setting up systems, kind of Jeff, like you were mentioning, was something that I learned after chasing down these 6 different property managers that I needed to do. I couldn't be the guy. I needed to be the CEO or the captain of the ship, proverbially. And so setting up and empowering local teams, local property management companies to run things on my behalf. Then I, of course, get involved with the major decisions. And then I get to be a little bit more strategic. I get to play chess with, okay, how is the portfolio operating? Are there efficiencies to be gained? Do we need to sell properties out of the portfolio to make my life easier? Maybe if that doesn't make sense financially, but just so I can free up mental bandwidth. And so I use property managers for 95% of my properties. I self-manage 2, but those are just my 2 primary residences that I have since moved out of that I now converted to rentals.
Got it.
So you said you have what's your W-2 right now then? So you still have the W-2 or what's?
Yeah, so it's funny, man. Like I've popped around with a couple different W-2s over the years. So my first W-2 that I had out of school that allowed me to purchase these first couple rentals that was traveling me all over the country. I was working as a professional fire protection engineer for an insurance company. I then left that job, actually was doing real estate full time and traveling the world with my wife right before COVID. And so we just wanted to go places that were tropical and cheaper than the US.
Yep.
And so where the currency was more favorable, so we would earn money in dollars from the portfolio and live off whatever the local currency was, and usually the exchange rate was favorable. Came home during the pandemic, and then I was working for a real estate tech startup called Roofstock, and I created an education program for them to help teach investors how to become investors, and we can get into that later if you guys want to. left that world, and now I'm actually back in the fire protection world, doing engineering for an insurance company again. Just it's a ton of fun.
That's awesome. So then, in your real estate portfolio, you have are these 60 units? Is it mostly buy and hold, or I think you've got some short term rentals as well? Like, how's the mix of, like, residential, long term rentals, buy and hold, commercial, short term rentals? Like, what's the portfolio mix, I guess?
Yeah, it's mostly long-term rentals, and I think that's just a function of that's what I knew when I first started investing in real estate. And so, like so many of us, my purview when I started was like this, was really narrow. And for anybody listening, I've got my hands right at like my ear level. And then it grew and grew and grew as I started just doing more deals. And so it was a long-term buy and hold is probably, like I said, 80%. And then I've got short-term is probably 10%. And then midterm and commercial is probably the remaining 10%. But of that long-term buy and hold, there's a good chunk, probably 75% of it was commercial multifamily value add that I basically stumbled into. I didn't know what that was at the time. What I recognized was, hey, I could buy this property for cheap. It rents, makes money based on those numbers today. But, oh, hey, if I spend 20 grand or whatever the number is, now each unit is going to rent for incrementally more. And when you multiply that incremental increase by the number of units in the property, those numbers tend to get pretty big really quickly. And so I was like, oh my God. So I wish I could turn back, look in the rearview mirror and go, oh yeah, that was very planned. That was really intentional. I had no idea what I was doing. And we can talk about some projects that went massively sideways because I had no business doing them to begin with, because I was remote, because I had no idea what I was doing. But it's all kind of worked out in the long run.
I think that's a light bulb moment that a lot of smaller investors have when they figure out, and this is certainly what happened with us too. When you have, a certain number of units, gives you more scale, gives you more opportunity to increase the value of those units, and then you're able to really increase the value of the property at a much faster rate than you could with like a single family home. So. But I do want to talk about I don't want to cut you off.
I was just going to follow up on what you said, one of the projects that went sideways.
Yeah, that's
maybe
what I
let's
want to
talk
hear
about
about
an
too.
example of one of those and what you learned from it.
Oh man, how much time do we have? So, okay. So let me set the stage. So I bought this property. It was a 20,000 square foot mixed use 3-story brick building. So it's a big building. It was 4 units of residential and 4 units of commercial, spread out kind of funky. It was like the building was a big L that had a face on 2 different streets. So I bought the thing. The owner was sketchy. Like right at the closing, he goes, "Bring a suitcase full of money to the closing, and like then we don't have to worry about." And I was like, "What is going on?" So kind of from the start, it was just kind of funky. And the whole reason I bought this building was because I was doing some local research about the market that this building was in, and turns out that the city was literally giving away money to developers and investors that created additional housing units because they were so short on housing. They said, hey, we need developers to create additional affordable housing units. And so if you did that, for every unit you created, the city would literally give you, in the form of a forgivable loan at 0% interest that didn't have to be repaid, like 20 grand per unit. So I was like, okay, this kind of seems like a no-brainer. So I took on this project and started developing the top floor. And then I decided midway through the project that I need to develop the middle floor. And then another several months into the project, decided to develop the bottom floor. And so the scope went from like splitting 1 unit in half to adding 15 units to this residential building / mixed use building. So, okay, I'm in Costa Rica with my wife. I had just left my full-time job. We were there on, I think, our 3rd or 4th day. I just got out of the water surfing. And I get a call from my property manager on a Saturday. Super nice guy. And he goes, "Michael, you're probably wondering why I'm calling you on a Saturday." I said, "That's correct, Josh. I am wondering why you're calling me on a Saturday. What's going on?" He goes, "Well, there's been a fire in the building." Oof. And I was like, oh my God. And I had just left my profession as a professional fire protection engineer. So I was like, well, okay, first off, did anybody get injured? Is anybody okay? Is everybody okay? He says, yep, there was nobody in the building. It happened on a Saturday. Somebody left a charger plugged in and overheated, had a big fire. And I was like, okay, well, that sucks, but glad everyone's okay. This is why we have insurance. Started getting insurance involved. And then we're still in Costa Rica, hanging out, having a good time. A week later, he calls me. Same property manager calls me on a Sunday, and he goes, "Michael, you're never going to believe this. There's been another fire in the building." And I said, "You've got to be kidding me." So it was on the roof this time. I was having the roof redone. Fire happened on the roof. So now insurance is like really looking at me like, who is this guy? Because that's like screams arson, self-sabotage type of thing. Like that just doesn't happen. Having a fire in a building is already an extremely low likelihood event. Having two in the same building a week apart, like just that doesn't happen. So needless to say, I got into this super, super long drawn out battle with insurance. Oh, and by the way, this happened September of 2019. So fast forward 6 months, we have COVID, worldwide pandemic, everything shuts down. So insurance is getting delayed, can't get people to physically come work on the building because it's an active insurance investigation. And to go to court with the insurance company, the court dates having to get rescheduled to be done online. Like it was just an absolute nightmare. And so what I quickly realized was, hey, I've still got a loan payment to make on the property that I used to purchase it. And I've got a construction loan that I've got to make payments on. So while all work has now ceased on this building, I've got all these expenses pouring in.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, this is awful. Like this is absolutely awful. So that's when I picked up really more full-time work with Roofstock, started making an income so I could just support and float these costs that I have that were relatively fixed while no progress is getting made on this building. So fast forward, was able to get through it, but all in all, it was about a 2-year battle with the insurance company. I had to bring in a public adjuster, had to go to court multiple times to get stuff reconciled. I mean, it was just an absolute nightmare. And so when oh yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say I could totally relate. And I think we might have even talked about it on your podcast. It's like levels, right? The headaches just get bigger. There's more and more things that happen. I've not had a fire at our properties, but we had a lot of shit
Keep it
happen.
that way.
Yeah, right. No kidding. And I have friends that have had them, close friends. And so, it's just, how did you find the sort of the mental toughness and resilience to like fight through it, right? Or it's like, hey, I mean, for me, I'm always like, look, I made my bed, I got to sleep in it. And so, what are we going to do to make this a better bed to sleep in? But what was your thought process when you're going through all this shit and you're like, oh my God, what am I, I've got this property that's 2 fires in a week. Come on.
Yeah. I think I had a similar mentality to you, Jeff, is like, this is something that I committed to doing, and so I've got to do it. But I think compounding on top of that was I had the loan for the building that I used to purchase. Then I had this construction loan. And then I had this forgivable loan from the city, which was several $100,000 to do the renovation. Now, if I sell that building or had sold that building inside of a 5-year window, I have to pay it all back. And so it basically I got myself into a situation where there is no backdoor. There is no option B, which in hindsight is like one of the stupidest things I've ever done, is like backing myself into a corner where I have no exit strategy outside of the one that I originally thought of. And so I'm like, well, I got to do something. And so I refinanced like every other property that I owned. I took additional loans. Like I did everything I could under the sun to get this project finished. And there was a ton of sleepless nights and a ton of stress. I mean, my wife will tell you, like, it was awful. It was dark for a long time. And it sucked. And it was just one of those things, like, there is no other option. So you have to make it work.
That story definitely hits home. I think you briefly touched on it with one of the properties we went through. And it's funny, the timeline is literally the same, where I got, instead of a call on a Saturday, we got a text with a piece of rebar. I remember still getting a piece of rebar hanging out of our parking garage. I remember seeing that. I'm like, oh, like that sucks, but tuck it back in there, maybe a couple grand to fix it. And then, a few weeks later, we found out, no, this parking garage is actually like bad, right? Like we need to shut it down. The city's going to shut this down. And that led into a full long story too, where it's essentially the city was going to shut down our occupancy for this building. And then COVID hits, and it's an office building, and a bunch of our tenants move out. And, again, 2 years of battle between us trying to come up with options, A through Z of what we could do with this, and a ton of learning lessons there. So it's funny. It's kind of similar timeline of events, and very much relatable there.
I think a lot of people went through a lot of that stuff around that timeline.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's one of those things like you figure it out because you have to.
Yes.
And I think once you recognize that that's the only available outcome to you, like the human brain's incredible. It starts like thinking about things differently when it's like, okay, like next, ready to do the next thing now because there is no other option.
Yes. Your back's against the wall, man. That's when you find out, what you're made of. And, and
Yep.
what I keep telling myself is I'm just preparing for, more and more of these scenarios as you're on the path of growth, like you're going to face more and more adversity. So like, who are you going to be when that adversity comes along? And a lot of times, people say, hey, and I talk to people that invest in real estate every day, right? And I talk to people that are just getting out, like selling their portfolio. Like, I just don't want to deal with it, blah, blah, blah. And that's totally fine. It's completely okay. It's not for the faint of heart. I tell people this all the time, but if you can fight through that adversity, you will get to the light on the next side. And no matter what that is, what that takes, but when it's almost a blessing to be put into a position where your back's against the wall.
And I think too, if you're growing, we're talking about real estate, but obviously in any business, right? If you're trying to grow a business, you're always going to be in a situation where you're fighting against something, right? It's never. I think maybe it might last for 2 weeks where everything's perfect and there's no problems, but there's always going to be something that, hey, this is the problem property in the portfolio, and we got to figure something out here, or whatever it is, right? That's just part of, right? Unless you hit a point where it's like, I'm done scaling, I got 50 units and I'm done, and I'm just going to manage this portfolio, right? Maybe there's less problems you encounter, but as you're trying to grow something, you're just going from problem to problem, right? I mean, for the most part.
Oh, it's so true, Brock. It's so true.
So let's talk about MyFi Academy. So can you give us the background on like what that business is and sort of what your goals are with that business?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate you guys asking. So basically, like I mentioned, I was with this company, Roofstock. That's like a tech platform for buying and selling single family homes. Their goal was to democratize single family home investing. And so I created for them an education program that was basically designed to teach people how to get involved in real estate investing or to help scale their portfolio if they had already been involved in the business, but maybe wanted to either scale or get involved in different asset classes. And that program shut down a couple of years ago. And my wife works in e-learning. And she was like, if only you knew someone in e-learning who could help you make your own course. And I was like, okay, message received. So I basically recreated so much of what I created there because A, I had already done it once. B, I knew that it was successful and that it worked because people were engaged in the program and then were buying homes. So clearly the content was designed for them, was working, and was successful. So I was like, oh, the proof's in the pudding. So I just remade it for myself. And so MyFi Academy is just something that I wanted to create and be able to help people on their financial journey, regardless of where they're starting from or where they're trying to get to, hopefully achieve financial independence with an emphasis on doing it through real estate. So I've got content soup to nuts. If you're just starting out, you've never invested in real estate before, but are maybe curious about it and how to do it, I've got stuff for you. If you're someone that's got 1 to 4 units under your belt and are trying to figure out how do I get to that 5, 10, 15, 30 mark, I've got stuff for you. And if you're someone that's like, I've only done single family, I hear about everyone talking about multifamily or duplexes, like what do I need to know? How do I get involved in that? I've got stuff for you. So it's really, I've taken my own experiences, distilled it down into like actionable bite-sized courses, and then I put it out there for everybody because this wasn't around when I got started. And like we were talking about so many of my mistakes and my speed bumps. I'm like, man, if I could have taken a course and paid a little bit of money for it, and I had saved myself all this time, headache, and dollars, I'm like, that seems like a no-brainer return on investment. So that's what it is. It's got a bunch of different functionality parts to it, but that in a nutshell is what MyFi Academy is.
Yeah, no, I completely agree that, the best investment that I've ever made, and a lot of people say this, is the ones that you can make in yourself and in your own knowledge and education. I think I've spent, well over 6 figures on different courses and masterminds and things like that, have kind of shaped, my journey. But, you can get a great return on a real estate deal, but the return that you can get on your education through different things like this, really materially impact things. And if you can, that's not to say you're not going to have the best teacher is experience, right? So you first and foremost, I tell people all the time to get educated, whatever way that is, through podcasts, through books, through educational courses and content that you pay for. That's generally even a step further along. But then eventually you've got to pull the trigger, and then you'll quickly learn from experience different things that can help you along your way.
Yeah, I agree. I mean,
That's just it, Jeff. And it's funny you mentioned that. Like this whole, I was so sick of seeing people like these courses and gurus like advertise and like hearing people go into these weekend seminars, and it's like you pay money to go to the seminar is free, and then there's this upsell, and to know the next level secret you got to pay, and I'm like, dude, this is such garbage, like that sucks. And so I was like, my goal is to put myself out of business in that my customers no longer need me. Here is the information to go do the thing that we're talking about and hoping to teach you how to do. Once you do it, then you have the experience. Go do it again and again and again. So it's really to help empower. My goal is to help empower people to be able to invest in real estate, because I know firsthand how impactful it can be.
Very cool. Absolutely.
So let's shift gears a little bit. So as we were prepping for this, I was doing some research, right? And I see part of your thing you have marketed, right, is the whole, like, kind of like the nomad lifestyle, right? So you got the souped up van and you're traveling a lot. Like, what is that? Like, are you doing that a lot, or like, what's that part of your lifestyle?
Yeah, so that was something that my wife came about the idea, or she had seen all these people doing van life, and she was like, Michael, like we could live in a van. And we were living on the Central Coast, like across the street from the beach at the time. And I was like, this was during peak COVID. And I'm like, no, we can't. Like, no, we can't. And she's like, yes, but like, why not? Yes, we can. So it's funny, when I tell people I lived in a van full time and traveled all over the country, they were like, oh man, like, that's so cool. That's so cool. Like, your wife must be so cool. I'm like, it was her idea. Like, I'm the one that didn't want to do this, that thought there was no way. So we were traveling internationally. Like I mentioned, I left my full-time job. We were traveling internationally for like the better part of a year, came home because of COVID. And then we didn't have our wiggles fully out yet. And we didn't have kids at the time. We had our dog. And so we built this van and then traveled around the country in that for 9 months. And so all the while we were traveling internationally, I was investing in real estate. And then same thing in the van, continued to invest in deals and pull the trigger on deals. And I think that's something that was so eye-opening for me, that I had already known in the back of my head, but it's location, investing in real estate is really location independent of you as an individual. And so you need to have access to a notary, but some states, depending on where you are, will accept a worldwide electronic notary, which is someone who's going to come on your webcam and physically watch you sign the documents. But outside of that, like every UPS store in the country has notaries. There are mobile notaries everywhere in the country. And so if you can access a notary, you're good to go. Something I found internationally was at every US embassy, there are notaries. And so I was in Panama, down in Central America, trying to close a deal. And so I made an appointment at the embassy. Well, turns out they would only grant you like 4 signatures per appointment. And I knew I needed more than 4 signatures. So I was like, crap. So I ended up flying from Panama City to Miami in the morning, I Ubered to the local UPS store by the airport, signed my docs, submitted them, and then got on a flight that afternoon back to Panama City. So like, there are ways to do this. The only limitation is how creative you can get. But it's one of those things. I'm like, I'm going to make this happen. And so what do I need to do to figure that out?
So, okay, let's go a little bit deeper. This isn't real estate related, but I'm just interested. So when you build out the van, what are the things that you like are looking for to like, how do you outfit it? Like,
Yeah. It's a great question. So she had shown me a ton of content like on Instagram of people doing these van life build outs with this Sprinter van. And so we're like, okay, let's do that. Let's go buy a Sprinter. We knew we wanted to convert it ourselves because everything out there was crazy expensive, all the fully kitted out ones. So we were looking, and even just like the raw van itself was super expensive. So we ended up finding, it looks like a box on wheels. And so it was just empty. It used to be a mobile golf showroom. So it had carpet on the walls and like the ceiling. And we're like, but it's perfect. It's just a box on wheels. It's a Ford engine. Like, anybody could work on a Ford. So we were working with a buddy of ours who did the conversion, and he's like, think about this. Like, he asked us, what are the things you can't live without? What are the things you need? And so we made him a list, and we were like, okay, this is what we need. So we have an indoor shower, which is something that I really wanted. We have a
indoor
toilet. We call it indoor.
Yeah.
Indoor. And it's full size. So it's like whatever, 6 feet. Well, full size for me. I'm not a very tall person. It's like 6 feet tall, hot and cold water, just like, you have at your house. We have 50 gallons of fresh water. We have an indoor 2-burner propane stove. We got a mini fridge and freezer. We have a full queen size bed. That was a really important thing to me. It's like, I want to be comfortable in this thing. So we have a queen size bed, and then storage everywhere else. And we got an instant water heater. We got this thing called the Wii Boost, which is basically a cell signal booster, because both my wife and I were working full time remote. So like, we have to have good cell signal. So it grabs local cell signal, boosts it, and then we would just hotspot with our phones to get internet that way. And then a roof rack, which is kind of like a deck, so we could put chairs up there and hang out and stuff. And then we have also an outdoor shower head, so we could rinse off the dog whenever we were done at the beach, or rinse off surfboards or whatever. So those were like the big things that I really wanted to make sure that we had. Everything else was kind of superfluous.
And when you guys were working remote, so like you guys are both like on calls and stuff remote, and was there any struggles with that? Like you're
big time.
Yeah. So I mean, did you guys get closer through that, or were there some knockdown, drag out fights being that close? I think it could be good and bad in a lot of ways.
Yes and yes to both. So we joked that it's kind of like living in a pressure cooker.
Yeah.
Everything comes to the surface way faster, both the good and the bad. And so, like you mentioned, we were both on calls. We were both doing stuff. She had a little bit more of a flexible schedule than me, and so she was able to work around me a little bit more. But so she'd be like in the front seat working, I'm on the pull-out table working, and I was recording podcasts and stuff and recording videos and doing coaching calls, all this thing. And so I remember one instance really specifically. I was in the middle of a podcast. She was up on the bed with our dog, and she was like, she gets hangry. She was getting super hungry, and she's like, like peeling open her string cheese, and someone at the other end of the podcast like, what's that crinkling sound? I was like, oh, sorry. Like, my wife's on the bed eating a string cheese. So we were laughing. And then my dog was like right here, because the bed is just like up from my shoulder. You can't see it in the screen, but my dog throws up on me because he had eaten something. And I was like, guys, hold on, like, I need a minute. So I was like, I got my wife eating cheese on the bed. My dog just threw up on me. I'm like, this is hard.
Yeah.
And so everything just takes more energy, effort, and planning. Making the bed is a task. But you got to do it. And so it's these little things that normally you don't think about doing, just require a lot more attention to detail. And so there's, I think, a real beauty in that. And to your question about like, did we get closer or knockout, drag out fights? Like, yeah, we had some big blow ups, but it was one of those things like, where are you going to go? Like, we better figure this out, because we're in this, 10 square foot space. We'd go for walks, blow off steam and stuff, but sometimes we'd be in the middle of a Home Depot parking lot.
Yeah.
There's not really anywhere to go walk out there. So you just figure out like who you are, who your partner is, if you're doing this with a partner. And then you figure out how to cater to their needs as best you can, because you're living, eating, going to the bathroom, working all in the same space. So I would highly recommend it to anyone who's interested. It's a ton of fun. It's a ton of work. And the work is what people don't show on Instagram, but it's a blast, guys.
Well,
like,
worth
it is
it.
so
Yeah.
much fun.
And if you have love, right, you can generally fight through that stuff. But I can totally see it being a pressure cooker environment.
Big time. Like every little sound your partner makes, you're like, God, shut up. You're like, that kind of stuff. It's just, it all comes to the surface. But like you mentioned, it's all worth it in the end. And we are, I think, so much stronger of a couple for it, because we have that experience to look back on it. Like we were mentioning, adversity makes you stronger. We always joke, like, this is not a big deal. Like, whatever we're going through in that moment, probably not a big deal. Like, we lived in a van together.
100%. So we're getting close to time here. I guess what I'd like to kind of dive into is, you've got a lot of awesome stuff going on. You built an incredible real estate portfolio, doing it remotely for the most part. What are you shooting for next? Like, are you kind of goal oriented? Do you have plans around what you want to do going forward? Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Yeah, that's such a good question. So I right now have kind of hit this point where from a portfolio, I always wanted to be the person that like had the biggest and baddest portfolio. And when I was in growth mode, I'm like, I'm going to hit 100 units. And again, it was this arbitrary number. I'm like, because 100 sounds good and I can brag about it to people at dinner parties. And then I took a step back and I'm like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever come up with in my entire life. And so I ended up getting to 75 units at one point, and I was like, this is not cool, man. This is so top heavy. And part of it was I was doing all these different things. And so I wasn't able to spend my time and attention where it really was needed. And so I started selling off units and descaling the portfolio. And my life has become so much simpler. And I'm like, okay, now I'm optimizing for life efficiency, not for financial or portfolio efficiency. And so now that's how I make my decisions. And a buddy of mine who's a little bit older, no, he's a lot bit older. He's in his 60s and he's a really successful business owner and real estate investor. He told me that a long time ago. And I'm like, this is for the birds, man. Like maybe I'll get there one day. And I hit that wall and I was like, okay, he was so on to something. So right now I'm just focusing on growing my business, MyFi Academy, doing my full-time job. My wife and I are pregnant. So we got our first on the way.
Congratulations.
So really optimizing. Thank you. Yeah, we're super excited. So figuring out, okay, what are the things and systems I need to set up and put in place to be able to spend as much time with my family as possible. Because it is, I mean, you guys know better than anyone. It's so easy to get taken away, your focus shifted to your real estate portfolio because there's a proverbial fire or sometimes a physical fire. And so figuring out, okay, how do I set this stuff up so that I don't need to be giving it as much attention on a day-to-day basis? And I'm okay not being as big or not growing as much as I wanted to because my priorities have shifted.
Absolutely. Life optimization. That's just editing the whole time, right? Like, how do I optimize this area? Now I got to optimize this area and this area. And it's just a constant iteration. Brock, what do you got?
I think that was great. Yeah, I loved the two fire story. Really stuck with me. I mean, that's to work through that and just picturing you getting those calls in another country. I mean, to battle all through that's awesome, man. I think a lot of valuable insight on this episode for sure.
Absolutely. So if you had one piece of advice for a listener that's just trying to get started in real estate, what would you say to them?
It's so cliche, but I'm going to say it anyway. It's like, just do it. And I think it's just do it, but figure out what is the one thing that you as an individual need to do to put one foot in front of the other to take the next step. And that's going to be different for everybody. And so some people might think, okay, just do it. Okay, I'll just go buy a property. Well, yeah, but also make sure you're educated. Don't be stupid about it, because you hear so many people like these horror stories in real estate, and like real estate doesn't work or real estate is stupid. And you're like, well, what was your foundation?
Yeah.
How did you go into this? What was your mindset? And when you realize that they just went and pulled the trigger, it was, what is it, the expression, shoot, ready, aim kind of a thing?
Yeah.
Like, you're doing it backwards. And so take the first step that you need for yourself in figuring out how do you do it. And so I don't know how helpful that is, but that's what I think resonates really well for me, and hopefully others can take that and make actions with it.
I love it. No, I totally agree. You got to get off the hump at some point. You definitely want to make sure you're educated, but definitely you got to take that first step and pull the trigger.
Yep.
I would say thank you very much for coming on. You're a great dude. I've really enjoyed getting to know you. Looking forward to hanging out and talking real estate more and more. For anybody that's listening, please smash the subscribe button and the like button and the bell button and all the other buttons that you can, and share with a friend. And also, where can we find more about you, Michael Albaum?
So I'm on Twitter, which is never something I thought I would say. I'm at Michael Albaum. I'm on LinkedIn, same. I'm on Instagram, another sentence I never thought in my life I would say, but I'm at MyFi Mike. And then we've got a podcast too. It's The Remote Investor. Anywhere you get podcasts, you can check that out.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, and tune in next time.
Thanks, guys. A lot of fun. Take care.